Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Lots lined up. Let's get started. It is a page straight out of China's playbook: promise peace and then provoke. For far too long, China has played this double game. This time, though, things have gone too far. There has been yet another border provocation by China. This time, over 100 Chinese troops transgressed into Uttarakhand. Not just that, China seems to be preparing for the long haul, with permanent accommodations along the line of actual control. Tonight on Gravitas, we tell you all about China's latest border provocation and how it is stoking tensions at the border. My name is Molly Gambhir. Also on the show for you tonight, a new report has revealed the extent of China's debt trap in the name of its Belt and Road Initiative. 42 countries and $385 billion worth of debt. We decode China's murky debt trap tactics. Japan is set to have a new prime minister. We tell you all you need to know about Fumio Kishida and the challenges that he faces. For far too long, world leaders have promised climate action. But time is running out, and so is the patience of youth activists who are calling out global leaders for not walking the talk. Women across the world take to the streets fighting for the basic right over their bodies, the right to have an abortion. We get you a Gravitas special report. But first, as always, Gravitas Global Headlines.
Germany's outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel reportedly congratulates Olaf Scholz, the leader of the Social Democratic Party, on his party's election success. This is the first time Merkel's comments on the election outcome have been made public. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Erdogan hold crucial talks amid growing Russia-NATO tensions, with Afghanistan dominating the agenda. The situation in Libya and Syria remains a priority for leaders. Putin hails compromises with Turkey, despite difficult negotiations. A little-known university engineer who worked with the World Bank is set to become Tunisia's first female prime minister. President Kais Saied names Najla Bouden Romdane as the next prime minister, 2 months after his power grab that many call a coup. Former Australian leader Malcolm Turnbull says his successor, Prime Minister Scott Morrison, deliberately deceived France when he scrapped a multi-billion-euro submarine deal with Paris. Turnbull says Morrison has not acted in good faith. North Korea claims that it successfully tested a new hypersonic missile called Hwasong-8. State media says the new missile was one of the 5 most important new weapon systems laid out in its 5-year military development plan. The North calls it a strategic weapon, which hints at its nuclear capabilities. Officials say that at least 24 prisoners were killed and 48 injured in a battle between inmates equipped with firearms and grenades at a prison in Guayaquil, Ecuador. This comes as Ecuador's prison system comes under criticism for links to Mexican drug gangs. The White House says that more than 400,000 Americans received a COVID-19 booster shot over the weekend. More than 1 million others have made appointments to get their 3rd jab in the coming weeks, say officials. 9 days after lava started to flow down Spain's Canary Islands, it reached the Atlantic Ocean, leaving a trail of devastation behind and displacing scores of residents. Towns have been blanketed in ash, while officials cite risks of explosions and clouds of toxic gases. Lionel Messi scored a sublime first goal for his new club Paris Saint-Germain as the French Giants beat Manchester City 2-0 in the Champions League. Idrissa Gueye gave the hosts an early lead before Messi sealed the victory in the 74th minute. Meanwhile, Moldovan debutants Sheriff Tiraspol claimed one of the great shocks in tournament history by beating 13-time champions Real Madrid 2-1 at the Bernabeu. Boxing legend Manny Pacquiao has announced his retirement from the sport at the age of 42 to focus on his political career.
Today, I am announcing my retirement.
Widely regarded as one of the greatest fighters of all time, Pacquiao is a 12-time world champion and the only man to win world titles in 8 different weight categories. Pacquiao was elected to the Philippines Senate in 2016 and will run for president in the 2022 elections.
China has provoked India at the border again. This time in Uttarakhand. It happened last month. Reports say 100 soldiers from the PLA transgressed the line of actual control. The Chinese are not stopping there. They are building new troop shelters at the LAC, installing S-400 missile defense systems and boosting military infrastructure. Instead of pulling its troops back from Ladakh, China is doubling down. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you how China is stoking tensions at the border. First, let's tell you about the border transgression in Uttarakhand. It happened on the 30th of August. The Chinese troops entered more than 5 kilometers into Indian territory through the Barahoti Ridge by crossing Tunjun La. The PLA brought with them 55 horses. They stayed for around 3 hours and left before the patrol teams from the Indian forces reached the spot. Some infrastructure in the area was damaged. This includes a bridge. Reportedly, local residents had first spotted the Chinese soldiers. They informed the authorities. That's when the Indian Army and the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police Force dispatched their patrol teams. Why is this transgression worrying? Because the Chinese soldiers entered a demilitarized zone. The PLA is not supposed to be there. But reports claim the Chinese soldiers have tried to infiltrate the Barahoti area before. In fact, in recent months, the PLA has stepped up its activities along the line of actual control. There have been 3 key developments. Number 1, the PLA has built more accommodations for its soldiers in the forward areas. Number 2, new airstrips and helipads have come up in the border areas. And number 3, the Chinese have deployed advanced weaponry. And the Chinese soldiers have been carrying out night exercises. Let's tell you about these developments in detail. First, the border accommodations. Reports say China has built new modular container-based accommodations. They have been built at least 8 forward locations along the line of actual control. These accommodations have been created in high-altitude areas, presumably to acclimatize the Chinese soldiers to the conditions. China has been beefing up this infrastructure for a while now. Back in June, a report had claimed that China has built permanent and temporary accommodations in 4 areas: Rudok, Kangshiwar, Gyanse and Golmod. In addition to living quarters, China constructed field hospitals there as well. Clearly, the Chinese soldiers are preparing for the long haul, and they are bringing heavy weapons to the front. Reports say China is deploying S-400 missiles near the border with India. So far, these systems have been deployed at 2 locations, the Hotan Air Base in Xinjiang and the Ningchi Air Base in Tibet. From those bases, China can target Indian fighter jets in the air even if they are 400 kilometers away. So China is deploying advanced weapons. It is also training its soldiers for how to use these weapons. Drills have become frequent now. Recently, the PLA carried out a night battle exercise. It happened in the Xinjiang region at an altitude of over 16,000 feet. Reports say the PLA has introduced more night drills for the units stationed near the Himalayan border. Why? Because it wants the troops to familiarize themselves with the new generation's weapons and equipment. What else are the Chinese soldiers learning? Reports say they are being trained to cross snowy highlands without lights. They are practicing how to fire machine guns during the night. The PLA is training its soldiers how to fight in the darkness of night. Let me sum up China's actions for you now. Chinese troops transgressed into a demilitarized zone. There are more soldiers and more weapons on the front. New accommodations are being built along the border. And China is preparing its troops for high altitude and nighttime warfare. What do these actions suggest? China does not want to end the border standoff. In fact, it wants to keep the tensions alive for as long as it can. And here's something else that China wants to keep alive: the BRI debt trap, Beijing's tool to enslave poor countries. A new report has revealed that dozens of lower-income countries have been saddled with hidden debt, all thanks to the Belt and Road Initiative. How much is this debt worth? $385 billion. And how many countries owe this money to China? There are at least 42 of them. But the World Bank or any global financial organization is not aware of this debt. How is that even possible? Our next report tells you.
$385 billion. That's the cumulative debt which dozens of lower-income countries have been saddled with, thanks to China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. This revelation has been made in a new report released by William and Mary's Global Research Institute. The report says that at least 42 countries have high levels of public debt to China, which is in excess of 10% of their GDP. This debt is hidden from the World Bank because the recipients are not central governments. Then who are they? State-owned companies, state-owned banks, joint ventures and private sector institutions. They've all struck deals with China under the Belt and Road Initiative. The contracts signed are murky, with some governments not even aware of their monetary values. There are a total of 163 such nations, most of them in Africa and Central Asia. They've received a total of $843 billion from China to build roads, railway lines, bridges, hospitals, oil refineries, industrial parks, power plants, ports, and shipping routes under the BRI. The report says that when these countries could not take any more loans, the Chinese regime got creative. Instead of lending money directly to governments, it began giving loans to a constellation of actors, which are often backed by a government guarantee. This guarantee requires the government to pay up in case the parties involved could not. Only that they have to pay higher interest rates, that too within a shorter repayment period. What happens if they are unable to pay these loans on time? They will have to lease out the projects to China, meaning China will have full control over the projects. This has happened several times around the world. The Gwadar port in Pakistan has been leased to China for 40 years. The Obok military base in Djibouti has been leased for 10 years. Tajikistan had to cede more than 1,000 square kilometers of land to China for a petty loan. Laos had to let go of its entire national electric grid to a Chinese company. And the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka has been leased to China for a period of 99 years. What do all these stories tell you? That the BRI is not a gift. It means to lure developing nations into borrowing more than they can afford. Once they are buried under debt, China enslaves them by seizing strategic assets as collateral. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
US President Joe Biden was supposed to be in Chicago today, but he changed his plans at the last minute, deciding to stay back at the White House. Why? Because America is on the brink of a dual financial crisis, a government shutdown and a credit default. Both could spell disaster, not just for America, but the world economy. And so Joe Biden has cleared his schedule. He will be holding talks with fellow Democrats to push his legislative agenda. First, let me give you some background. The Biden administration has made two proposals. Number one, a funding bill. This includes $1.2 trillion in infrastructure and $3.5 trillion in social spending. America's fiscal calendar runs from the 1st of October to the 30th of September. If a budget is not passed in time, the US government will not have money to run the country. It's called a government shutdown. Number two, raising the debt ceiling. In America, Congress decides the level of national debt. Right now, it stands at $28.4 trillion. But Joe Biden wants to borrow more. If not, America will not be able to pay interest on its loans. The Treasury will run out of cash around the 18th of October, to be precise. So what is the president's strategy looking like? The Democrats first tried to hit two birds with one stone, basically pass both these proposals with one vote, the spending bills and the debt ceiling. This did not work. The Senate Republicans blocked the vote. They want both issues to be tackled separately. So what happens now? The Democrats are planning a standalone vote on the debt ceiling. They have a slim majority in the Senate, so they can pass this bill even without Republican support. But what about the funding bill then? This is where Joe Biden has a tough job. The infrastructure bill is a bipartisan proposal. It should be passed easily, but the social spending plan is much more complicated. Republicans are not on board, which means Joe Biden needs the support of every single Democratic senator. Two of them are holding out, Senators Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin. They say the plan is too lavish. Joe Biden, in fact, hosted both senators at the White House on Tuesday, but there are no indications of a breakthrough. So what happens if there is no consensus? Can the infrastructure bill be passed alone? Well, that's the other problem. Progressive Democrats are being stubborn. They say pass both or pass none. Neither side is giving up, and as a result, America is facing a full-blown crisis. A government shutdown and a credit default are two separate things, but their impact can be similar. Let's take them one by one. A shutdown is exactly what it sounds like. All non-essential sectors will close. That means no museums, no national parks, no tax services. Roughly 3 in 5 workers could be furloughed. Only a few services will continue, like air traffic control, border protection, law enforcement, basically the bare minimum. What happens if there is a credit default? And now this is tricky. America has seen government shutdowns earlier, but it has never defaulted on loans, not even once. So this is uncharted territory. Nobody knows what the exact impact would be. Here's what the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, says.
It is imperative that Congress address the debt limit. If not, our current estimate is that Treasury will likely exhaust its extraordinary measures by October 18th. At that point, we expect Treasury would be left with very limited resources that would be depleted quickly. America would default for the first time in history. The full faith and credit of the United States would be impaired, and our country would likely face a financial crisis and economic recession as a result.
A pretty grim picture. Millions of Americans would lose Social Security and Medicare. U.S. soldiers may not get their paychecks. Food assistance will stop. Pension payments would lapse. Nearly 6 million Americans could lose their jobs. This is an unprecedented crisis. The world's largest economy is days away from defaulting on its loans. And for Joe Biden, it is a global embarrassment. Remember, he was supposed to be the stable president? Yet, on his watch, America is facing financial ruin. So where does this leave Joe Biden's global agenda? He is pitching an alternative to China's Belt and Road. We are talking about trillions of dollars. How will a fiscally conservative America bankroll this project? Well, the simple answer is they cannot. China's political system gives it an edge over America. Xi Jinping does not care about consensus. He is the consensus in China. Joe Biden, on the other hand, faces a partisan battle. Let me give you an example here. Republicans do support raising the debt ceiling. The problem is they don't want to take responsibility for it. Because midterm elections are due next year, Republicans don't want to be seen as expanding the national debt. Party politics is the life of every democracy. But if Joe Biden wants to compete with China, he will have to build bipartisan consensus. After all, that is what Joe Biden promised on the campaign trail. And talking about Joe Biden's promises, here is another one. This is from January 20th this year, the day Biden was inaugurated as the U.S. president. He made a promise to the American people. Listen to this.
Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy.
I will always level with you. That is what Biden said. He promised honesty. He promised to be straightforward. 9 months later, we are not so sure. Let me show you a conversation from August. A few days after the Taliban captured Kabul, Joe Biden sat down for an interview. Among other things, he was asked about the military advice that he got. Did his generals ask Biden to retain some troops in Afghanistan? This is how the U.S. president responded.
Our military advisors warned against withdrawing on this timeline. They wanted you to keep about 2,500 troops.
No, they didn't. It was split. That wasn't true. That wasn't true.
They didn't tell you that they wanted troops to stay?
No, not in terms of whether we were going to get out in a time frame, all troops. They didn't argue against that.
So no one told, your military advisors did not tell you, no, we should just keep 2,500 troops. It's been a stable situation for the last several years. We can do that. We can continue to do that.
No one said that to me that I can recall.
That was in August. Joe Biden said no one advised him to keep soldiers in Afghanistan. Turns out that is not the real story. The U.S. Congress has been grilling America's top military leaders, and they narrate a different story. Listen in.
It was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated, gated solution.
I recommended that we maintain 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. And I also recommended earlier in the fall of 2020 that we maintain 4,500 at that time. Those are my personal views. I also have a view that the withdrawal of those forces would lead inevitably to the collapse of the Afghan military forces and eventually the Afghan government.
You just heard from America's top military leaders. General Mark Milley is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is the most important link between the White House and the Pentagon. General McKenzie is the commander of the U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM. What did both the generals want? To retain American soldiers in Afghanistan. That is what they recommended to Joe Biden. But the president says he never got this advice. Who do you trust? 2 4-star generals testifying under oath, or a president doing damage control on television? As they say, soldiers don't lie, politicians do. The White House is desperately trying to defend the president. Here's what the press secretary, Jen Psaki, had to say.
I would note today, in the testimony that was given by Secretary Austin, by General Milley, they made clear, Secretary Austin specifically said, if you stayed there at a forced posture of 2,500, certainly you'd be in a fight with the Taliban and you'd have to reinforce. So what should everybody take from that? There was a range of viewpoints, as was evidenced by their testimony today, that were presented to the president, that were presented to his national security team, as would be expected, as he asked for.
Nobody is questioning the president's right to take decisions. Generals can only advise. The ultimate call must be taken by the president. But that's not the issue here. The issue is Joe Biden trying to lie. The generals clearly asked him to retain troops in Afghanistan. They also warned him that the Afghan government may collapse. Why did Joe Biden ignore their advice? Was it because of political convenience? And if it was, why lie about it? There are two serious charges against President Biden of ignoring his military advisors and of lying about the recommendations that he got. Both will seriously indict. Retaining American troops was the right call. If Joe Biden had listened to his advisors, Afghanistan would still be a democracy. Afghan girls could be in schools, and the Taliban could have been on the run. Leadership is all about making tough calls. President Biden hesitated, and an entire country is suffering. The least he can do is come clean and set the record straight on what advice he got. On the 17th of August, the Taliban conducted their first press conference after taking over Afghanistan. There were two women at this briefing. Zahra Nabi was one of them. She was handling the camera for Bano TV, a TV studio and radio network that she co-founded. Bano TV was a symbol of how far Afghan women had come. It was owned by women and employed only women. But that changed when the Taliban took over. Zahra Nabi questioned the Taliban multiple times on women's right to work, on their right to study. More than a month later, she finally has her answer. Bano TV is being shut down. But before the lights went out, WION's Anas Malik visited their studio and he sent us this report. Take a look.
The Bano TV in Afghanistan, which was a women-led initiative, is one of the media houses that has been forced to shut down following the Taliban takeover. Zahra Nabi, the owner over here, has said that it has become increasingly difficult for her to operate in these conditions.
This is the reception. So we had our receptionist sit down here, so you'll have it, and this. We designed this like a lady is just blowing a butterfly, and it shows the future and the hope, everything. But this one, I have to take it, I have to take it. It's the one part. I keep it till the end day, then the end day I will take it out. Here we have, it was our main studio. So our main studio was, here we had chroma key, and then here we had the set of, a political show, and then there we had, a family show and for like a ladies show. So we use for ladies shows always butterfly and these things. A small TV station, but about 550. We had, the crew, and all of them were women working. This station were lead by women for women.
What do they say? What do they tell you? Why do they want to close
The first thing is that women are not allowed to work. Even in the Ministry of Women, even women are not allowed to work for women. A woman cannot work as a teacher. They are not allowed, even the little girls cannot go to the schools. So of course for the media, women are not allowed to work in the media like the past and these things. Our staff, all of them decided, so they're jobless and they have no future, and they said that previous time they stayed more than years here, 5 years like this year. This time if they stay, it's wasting time, so they don't allow us these things. They decided to leave the country. This place is edit room. So here we used to sit and have editing. The first press conference I will attend there, I asked him, can you please tell us about future of women
I was
media, yeah. But he didn't give me clear. He said you have to wait. The next time I asked him again the same question, that how about the woman, woman future? Still he said you have to wait. The third time I wanted to ask him, he didn't allow me to ask, but finally I asked him that still he said you have to wait. So
while the Taliban claim that they will be giving rights to women in their rule, the facts on ground are contrary to their claims. Women from different sections of the society are saying and complaining that they have been barred from working. The process to unlearn the doings and gains of the past 20 years is currently underway, but it would not be an easy ride out for the Taliban to undo the fruits and gains of the past 20 years itself. Anas Malik in Kabul, Afghanistan, for WION, World is One.
Japan is getting its 100th Prime Minister. His name is Fumio Kishida. Kishida will succeed Yoshihide Suga, who is stepping down after just 1 year in office. Suga proved to be an unpopular choice for Japan's ruling party, the Liberal Democratic Party. Under him, Japan witnessed its worst ever wave of Wuhan virus cases. Suga's decision to host the Olympics only made matters worse. Japan's next general election is due in about 2 months. Fumio Kishida now faces the challenge of reviving his party's fortunes. What does he bring to the table? Our next report tells you more about Japan's new Prime Minister. Japan is getting its third Prime Minister in a year. Fumio Kishida is the man who will now lead the country. Kishida was not the popular choice. He lagged behind in the opinion polls, but when the leadership contest began, he came back from behind in a rather dramatic fashion. Kishida defeated his chief rival and the highly popular vaccines minister Taro Kono 257 to 170 in a runoff vote. Kishida, a former foreign minister of Japan, says his habit of listening to the people helped in securing his victory.
Listening to the voice of the nation carefully and doing politics attentively and generously, I think I have been gaining support because of such policies.
Fumio Kishida is known within his party as a consensus builder. He is a scion of a political family from Hiroshima. In 2020, Kishida challenged the outgoing Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga in the leadership contest, but lost. This time, he ran on a promise to spend billions to revive Japan's economy.
Within this year, I will complete a stimulus package worth tens of trillions of yen so that I can create a mood where many Japanese people would want to support us. I would like to increase income and salary for as many Japanese people as possible. I think that's the kind of economic policy I would like to take.
Those promises could help the Liberal Democrats, the ruling party of Japan. Yoshihide Suga's decision to host the Olympics damaged the party's credibility. His popularity slid below 30% as a result. Kishida has his task cut out. Japan's next general election is scheduled for November this year. Kishida must revive his party's fortunes before that. He also faces the challenge of confronting Chinese aggression. Kishida supports a strong US-Japan partnership. He believes it is necessary to protect universal values like freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. Kishida backs the idea of passing a resolution condemning China's treatment of the Uyghurs, but it remains to be seen if he will continue to take the same hard line against China once he takes the top job.
Kishida is known as a moderate, and his tone during his campaign has been one that has seen fairly harsh at sometimes towards his stance on China to one that seems open to dialogue. So whilst he has criticised China and said it represents a threat and he will not tolerate its authoritarian approach in the South and East China Seas, he's also said that he's very open to dialogue. He's recognised that there are a huge number of exchanges, people to people, and that China is Japan's #1 trading partner and Japan is China's #2 trading partner. So he's very important to keep the dialogue open, but he said that any discussions must be incredibly frank. They must be in lines of principles of freedom and democracy. So we can expect him to walk a very cautious path, leaving the door open, but also trying to show a united and strong front to the people back here in Japan.
Winning the election was the easy part for Fumio Kishida. He was seen by the party insiders as a safe choice. But now, Kishida faces the challenge of retaining power. Experts say his lack of charisma could come in the way. With just a few months left for the next election, Kishida will have to hit the ground running from day one to prove his critics wrong. Bureau Report, WION World is One. For years, world leaders have dragged their feet on climate change. Some have denied the science, others have ignored it. The result? Climate catastrophes of massive proportions. In November this year, these world leaders have a chance to course correct. They will be meeting in Glasgow to review progress on climate action. They will also be setting new climate goals. And if they need that extra nudge of encouragement, a few young climate activists are more than happy to oblige. Take a look.
You don't see world leaders getting scolded very often, especially not by teenagers. But looking at the inaction on climate change, some tough love might be a good idea. That's exactly what they got here at the Youth Climate Summit in Milan. It's a warm-up act for the main event in November, the COP26 Climate Conference in Glasgow. 400 activists from 180 nations are attending the event. Among them is Greta Thunberg. The 18-year-old activist was her furious and assertive self.
But urgently necessary. There is no planet B. There is no planet blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. This is not about some expensive, politically correct green act of bunny hugging or blah, blah, blah. Build back better, blah, blah, blah. Green economy, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero, blah, blah, blah. Climate neutral, blah, blah, blah. This is all we hear from our so-called leaders. Words. Words that sound great, but so far has led to no action.
That was a direct swipe at Joe Biden and Boris Johnson. Both men are plugging their new pandemic recovery plans, Build Back Better. And Greta Thunberg clearly is not a fan. She says it is all
blah, 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 blah.
Until now, young people were part of the conversation on climate change, but never the actual policy making. The Milan summit is trying to change that. Recommendations made at this summit will be sent to Glasgow. So are the leaders listening? Well, some of them are.
It was really amazing. First of all, connecting with youths from around the world. This is a great initiative for being able to bring youths across the world, Africa, America, Pacific, to come together and think about how we can save our planet.
Blah, blah, blah.
Greta Thunberg says the youth activists have been cherry-picked, that world leaders are just pretending to listen. Greta was joined on stage by fellow activist Vanessa Nakate, a 24-year-old from Uganda. Her message was simple. We've seen the promises, we've seen the campaigns, now show us the money.
No more empty conferences. It's time to show us the money. It's time, it's time, it's time. And don't forget to listen to the most affected people and areas. Thank you.
Nakate broke down after the speech. Her continent, Africa, is the lowest carbon emitter. But the effects of climate change ravage the continent. This is a crisis that has no borders, no nationality. Yet, these concepts are hampering our fight against climate change. To be fair, world leaders are making progress, or at least trying to. Joe Biden hosted a climate summit earlier this year. Some major commitments were announced, but have they grasped the urgency of this crisis? That's what these young activists are asking.
Did you hear me? What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it?
World leaders are still talking about roadmaps and targets. The problem is, this isn't an issue for the future. Climate change is already here. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
On the 28th of September, the world marked International Safe Abortion Day, a day to commemorate the fight to make abortion legal. In Latin America, where abortion laws happen to be the strictest, this day was marked with widespread protests. Women's rights activists hit the streets in their respective countries to remind their leaders why regressive abortion laws need to be junked. Take a look.
Abortion, a basic right of a woman over her body. But in at least 26 countries, this right has been snatched away from women. On the 28th of September, which marks International Safe Abortion Day, women across the world took to the streets to remind their leaders why abortion is not anti-life, and to demand access to legal, safe and free abortion. The protests were the strongest in Latin America, which has some of the strictest abortion laws in the world. In Chile, hundreds of people hit the streets of Santiago to seek the legalization of abortion in the country. The protests came right after Chile's lower house approved a bill to decriminalize abortion within 14 weeks of pregnancy. The bill was passed 2 years after it was submitted and still faces the hurdle of being approved by Chile's upper house, which is ultra-conservative. With chances of the bill's passage looking bleak, Chileans are keeping up the pressure.
We will continue to make progress so that it can be guaranteed as a universal right, a public health right, so that no woman or girl is violated for wanting to decide on termination of a pregnancy.
In Mexico, where only 4 out of 32 states have legalized abortion, dozens of women marched on the streets of the capital to seek an all-out decriminalization in the country. The demonstrations even turned awry, with widespread altercations between the protesters and the police.
It's a great step for all women because there are women who are raped, there are women who are put in jail for spontaneous abortion, and more than anything, it is up to each one. No one to dictate what we do with our body in order to be free, so that what we did not have, what our mothers and grandmothers did not have, becomes available for future generations without taboos.
In Venezuela, where an abortion carries a prison sentence of 2 years, demonstrators marched through downtown Caracas, playing drums and wearing green handkerchiefs. Their banners read, "Legalize abortion now." Their slogans called upon the government to ensure safe and free abortion.
La Ruta Verde es la campaña por la despenalización.
The Green Route is a campaign for the legal and social decriminalization of pregnancy interruption in Venezuela. We are here on this Global Day of Action for Legal and Safe Abortion here in Caracas, in the Morelos Square, to call on the Venezuelan government, to also call on society in general regarding the right to have a safe and accompanied abortion in our country.
A tener un aborto seguro y acompañado en nuestro país.
In Peru, where abortion has been illegal since 1924 and is only permitted in case of a threat to a woman's life, thousands of women gathered outside the country's Palace of Justice, waving green flags and banners that read, "Surviving clandestine abortion is a class privilege."
We have high numbers of girls being raped who are then forced to be mothers. This must change. The reality is all Latin America has been changing, and Peru can no longer be left behind.
In El Salvador, scores of women accompanied by men marched through the country's capital to seek loosening of the country's abortion laws. El Salvador has one of the strictest abortion laws in the world. It prohibits the termination of pregnancy, even in cases of rape and a life-threatening situation. Salvadorians from all walks of life took part in the procession, accusing their government of systematically violating the rights of women.
The Salvadoran state is systematically violating the rights of girls, women and pregnant women by not guaranteeing a law that allows women to terminate pregnancies. Currently, 20 women are being prosecuted and criminalized. Women who are unjustly imprisoned. It is the situation that we want to transform.
A total of 12 Latin American nations witnessed protests to legalize abortion, serving as loud reminders to end laws that are anti-choice, anti-women, anti-equality, and anti-life.
Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
With that, it's a wrap, leaving you, as always, with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.